When we think about the practical implications of all of this on the ground, right? I'm seeing there's a real tension between the world that the white Christian nationalists are trying to create and the world that the rest of us live in. This is an example that might feel a little far afield to use that term again, but I'm going to try to connect it as best I can in the aftermath. I'm seeing a lot of videos and images of, white Christian nationalist type folk, or folk who believe that their power as a result of walking in a white body gives them the ability to still dominate over black people. And what they're realizing is that black people today got hands, and the white folks don't have whips and chains the way they use it. They got them systematically, but they don't walk around with them the way they might have in the old days of good old Jim Crow. I'm being very facetious for those of you who are new to the audience about everything I just said. But and so we're seeing these videos of people responding in real time to a segment of the white community's desire to physically dominate black people the way they imagine, I'm sure, their ancestors did, and black people who are alive in 2025 being like, what you gonna do is catch this fist. And so that tension between white Americans who are in alignment with white Christian nationalism, who are trying to recreate this world, and those of us who are not trying to recreate this world with them, there's a huge clash here. When it comes to the impacts of the First Amendment and the protections that white Christian nationalists are going to get as a result of the way in which the Supreme Court is ruling, as a result of the way in which Trump and the Republicans are sort of driving policy. And the reality is that we got words. We got a lot of words. We got a lot of things. Like, talk to us about what that clash of this effort to remake the First Amendment so that only white people get to benefit the way they did during enslavement, and the 2025 version of black people that we're doing right now. And y'all, just to be clear, I'm not trying to suggest that, because y'all know I hate that phrase, I'm not my ancestors. You better thank God you're not, because you would not be able to last. And this is not one of those, they might try to come at me, but I'm not my, no, this is not that. This is about the fact that if you have the ability to fight back now in the way our ancestors did not, it is because our ancestors bit a lot and took a lot, and in their effort to survive. So I want to hold space for that. But we are in a very different time in our 2025 thinking of things, Imani, and we're dealing with people who really are living like it's 1799. What is that going to look like, practically speaking, if this decision comes down such that the First Amendment really is rewritten in a way that is going to benefit the white Christian nationalist cisgendered folk to the detriment of the rest of us?
I mean, that's such a hard question to answer because on the one hand, I don't think black people are going to put up with it. On the other hand, we have a president who is just itching to say martial law and to impose
Right.
curfews, right? Like that's part of the reason why it's been so heartening to watch the number of white people, not even white, left-leaning folks, but you see white
Right.
folks in red states yelling at Chuck
Yep.
Grassley, right? I
Yep.
don't think that this country is ready for a populace that is integrated and rising up, right? Like I feel like
Mm.
this first line of defense for these first few months has been a lot of white folks hitting the streets. And I think that's great because I don't think this country is ready to watch white people get beat up on TV. Right. I don't
Right.
think that they're ready to do, they are more than ready to watch black people get beat up on TV.
That's
They
right.
love that shit.
That's right.
But I don't think they're ready to watch white people get beat up. So I think what this is going to look like, it's going to look like finding community with other people who understand, even like, because like one point I want to make, like you probably have a lot of black Christian listeners, right?
Yeah.
All of this evangelizing of the First Amendment isn't going to benefit black Christians, right? It's only going to
Ooh.
benefit white Christians. So there really is a need. I think there's a need for one, for leftists, the sort of left leaning people to really work with the more centrist white folks who kind of get a
Right.
sense that there's something quite not quite right, but they don't really
Mm-hmm.
know how to name it. They don't really know how to put a label on it.
Right.
But
For our
honestly,
black.
I think it's going to be scary. I think once, because Donald Trump issued that executive order basically saying that he's going to federalize, local law enforcement. He's going to use the military for local
Right.
law enforcement. And then you get into whether or not that violates the Posse Comitatus Act. Excuse me. And I do want to point out to your listeners that the Posse Comitatus Act started because they wanted to keep the South wanted to be able to institute Jim Crow, right? They wanted to be able to institute Jim Crow. So it's not like Posse Comitatus was a policy that was enacted in order to benefit the little guy. It was
Mm.
enacted in order to benefit the white supremacists. And if you look at the way it operates, there are lots of ways that a Trump can get around it. So I
Right.
think it's going to be really scary, but I think now more than ever, it's important to find community with people.
And finding community is something we've been really driving home on these airwaves, and at my in my real life at the Center for Law and Social Justice. Community building, community has been sort of our big theme. We've got a whole book club that we refuse to do virtually because, like, no, we need to be in person in community. Although y'all know I be hating in person events because child COVID still be COVIDing. But like the idea of being in community is going to matter, yes, for mutual aid. It's going to matter, yes, for us getting our needs met. How does being in community help us to navigate these sorts of policy shifts where an amendment like the First Amendment is being rewritten in front of our eyes? One of my mentors, who is the founder of the law center that I now lead, she spent a year at Harvard looking at the 14th Amendment and the fact that the Second Amendment is going to be elevated, and they're going to use the 14th Amendment to elevate all of these other amendments in and reinterpret them in the benefit for whiteness. What does being in community mean when it comes to the reinterpretation of basic laws? Like if they're going to reinterpret the 1964 Civil Rights Act, for example, which prevents the use of racism to determine the allocation of resources in public accommodations. What does being in community look like when the community is gathering to prevent those sorts of judicial reinterpretations of rights we have known and come to appreciate? What does that look like on the ground?
I think it looks like people like you and me explaining to other folks why this stuff is so important, right? Like we went to law school, but we're
Mm,
not in private practice. We are constitutional
yeah.
scholars in our own right, particularly
Yeah.
when it comes to, the 14th Amendment. Right now, the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act are being rewritten so that they only protect white people, right? Like
Right.
if you look at the disparate impact executive order that he issued,
Oh,
right?
girl.
Basically saying that disparate impact no longer matters. You have to have discriminatory intent. And then if you look
Mm,
at what their narrative is surrounding the so-called reverse discrimination, right? Surrounding DEI and how all of these unqualified Black people are getting into programs due to DEI. That technically could be discriminatory intent. The existence of a DEI program could be viewed as discriminatory intent. So we have a world
wow.
where the only people who can sue under the Civil Rights Act are white people because they've got the discriminatory
Yeah.
intent right there in the DEI policy. Meanwhile, Black
Right.
folks have to find, the real nefarious KKK member who's saying, I ain't giving no job to you Negroes. And then that's how we're supposed to be able to prove discriminatory,
Mm,
a violation of the Civil Rights Act or the 14th Amendment. So the society is currently being reordered. And I think it's up to you and me and any of your listeners who really understand that, even if your listeners didn't go to law school, but you can look around and see how these cases are shaking down. You can see how, Fearless Fund, which built a VC capital fund that was given 15, like small loans, $15,000 loans to Black entrepreneurs, they had to
yeah.
shut down because Christopher Rufo got some people to complain that they were being discriminated against. When something like less than 1% of VC funds go to Black people. Like
Right.
this isn't this is a purposeful erasing of Black people from having any access to power and from
Mm,
having any ability to make a life for themselves, right? Like this resegregation of society is the greatest resegregation of society since Woodrow Wilson basically told all Black people to get out of civil service in 1930, whatever. So I think coming into community looks like talking to people, explaining to people what is going on. And if you're like me and you live around hella white people who are just doing their best, but they don't really understand what's going on, I went to a small dog group and just talked to a bunch of white folks about, what's going on, trying to gauge where they are in the political spectrum so that I can sort of just start putting little ideas into their heads about what's going on
mm,
because that's the way we got to do it. It's just like it's
yeah.
really just it's like an individualized conversation by conversation endeavor.
Mm, which means we have to know what it is that we're talking about. And that's one of the
Right.
reasons why I'm so grateful for the work that you and
Four
Jessica are
minutes.
doing and your entire team over at Rewire News Group. I was so glad to see your elevation. You guys have been growing and expanding, and I'm on your email list, and I'm a sponsor or a supporter, whatever you guys call it. So I'm grateful because out of efforts like that, you all get to educate the rest of us so that we know how to engage and how to have these conversations. Imani, what is the best way for people to connect with you, to follow Rewire News Group, to learn more about this so that they can be prepared? And y'all, it's not just talking to the white folks who are trying to be righteous, or the white folks who are ambivalent. Our entire community has suffered greatly from a lack of education, defunded education. They don't want to defund the police, but they will defund your education and your healthcare any day of the week. And so we need to be explaining these issues to our family members. We have a lot of family members who believe that white Christian nationalist policies they believe more in the Christian than the white part. They don't know the implications of the racial elements of what's happening right now. And so you're going to have to explain that to them. You're going to have to tell them. And again, that's one of the reasons why we're so grateful, Imani, that you give us this time. For people who want to read more of Rewire News Group, connect with y'all, what's the best way for them to do that?
Go to rewirenewsgroup.com on the internet. If you go to rewirenewsgroup.com/newsletters, we've got 3 great newsletters. One of them is uplifting. It talks about the good things that are happening. One of them is called Executive Dysfunction, talks about all the executive dysfunctional things that are happening with Trump. And then the other is Jess Mason Piclo's newsletter, The Fallout. Follow us on all your socials. We've got really, really great content. And, if you can support us and you can donate, we will always take your money. $5 helps because we are not corporate funded.
That's right. But that is the voice, though it is not a corporate funded voice. That is the voice of Imani Gandy, the co-chief content officer for Rewired News Group, keeping it 100 and making sure that we are safely being informed and educated in ways that can make sure that our physical safety is no longer exposed to the dangers that we are seeing left, right, and center. Imani, as always, thank you so much for being with us. One of these days, you and I will meet in real life.